Face Off. Adapted from A Woman's Fight with a Leopard by Frederick Pitman.
When my husband, the manager of a big company ranch, brought me to the bushveld of the Northern Transvaal, I had no knowledge of wild animals, save that gleaned from books and occasional visits to the London Zoo, and never dreamed that I should come into close quarters with them. I little thought, when I left my quiet home in England, that through Cupid's caprice I should make my home in the almost uninhabited bushveld, listen at night to the roar of lions, learn to shoot with ease and accuracy, and as you will hear, find myself one day under the paw of a savage leopard. The bush of the Northern Transvaal, sloping down to the Limpopo River and stretching for scores of miles in every direction, is still very dense, in spite of small clearings here and there, and abounds with big game. A woman who is asked to go there to live will do well to make sure beforehand that a life of isolation will not unnerve her, and that nature has endowed her with the ability to keep a stiff upper lip in emergencies. It isn't much use to cry for mother, and there are often no neighbours within miles to call upon to lend a hand. But if she be cheery and athletic, and can be a true comrade to her man in his task of subduing the wild, she need have little fear of the unknown things hidden away in the bush beyond the strip of cultivated lands around the homestead. On moonlight nights I have watched the lion steal out from the shadows and creep stealthily across the open to the big thorn kraal in the hope of stampeding our donkeys and oxen. Once 3 lions came out, but only 2 returned. The third fell to my gun. He was my first trophy among the big cats, and I am very proud of his skin. Incidentally, he whetted my appetite for the more hazardous forms of sport. Leopards, however, the tigers of the Boers, are our bane, and we should very much like to exterminate the great spotted beauties, for their appetite for our calves and goats is insatiable. They have their lairs in a line of big koppies, a mile from the homestead, and lie so low during the daytime that it is useless to try to hunt them among the rocks. One day I surprised a big fellow sunning himself on a broad shelf of rock, and drew a bead on him to some purpose, but there was little risk in that, and small merit in making a bull on so easy a target. It was otherwise with the animal that gave me the scare of my life. Lions were taking a heavier toll than usual of the cattle on the ranch, as well as of our own in the kraal, and my husband set traps in the hope of circumscribing their undesirable activities. He set 2 one moonless night not far from the house. Soon after supper, excitement in the cattle kraal told us that enemies were prowling around. It was too dark to see far, but presently a commotion at one of the traps told us we had made a catch. Taking a hurricane lamp and his gun, my husband went out to investigate. He arrived at the trap, only to find that the animal, whatever it was, had wrenched itself free. Close examination showed the creature to be a leopard, not a lion, as we supposed, and blood spoor, leading to the bush, indicated that he was badly wounded. To attempt to follow him in the darkness would have been madness, so we left him until morning, in the hope of intercepting him before he could reach his lair in the koppies. Immediately after sunrise and morning coffee, my husband, accompanied by a native boy, set out to follow up the blood spoor. He forbade me to accompany him, lest the spoor should lead, as was likely, to the very top of the rocks, and as yet I had had no experience in tackling a wounded animal. The men had not gone far, however, when the hunting instinct got hold of me also, and I determined to have some sport on my own account, even if I could not help to trail the leopard. I might at least get a buck that had not quite finished his morning feed in the mealie lands, I thought. So, loading my gun with buckshot, I followed on my husband's trail, intending to turn off at the edge of the bush to look for my buck in the mealies. I was still about 300 yards behind my husband and the African guide, who was searching for the spoor, which they had lost in the long grass, when, to my horror, I caught sight of the leopard about 30 yards to my left, crouching behind a rock. It was evidently more badly wounded than we thought, and had been unable to get far on its homeward way. Now, it is characteristic of the leopard, alone among wild animals I believe, that even when badly wounded, it will often make no attempt to attack, unless it knows it has been observed. If his eye catches yours, well, you have to act quickly, or he will assuredly get his blow in first. The instant I saw his gleaming eyes fixed on me, he sprang, straight and swift as an arrow. Instinctively, I threw my gun to my shoulder, but before I realised that, in my fright, I had not cocked it, the great beast was upon me, and I went down under his weight like a child. I fell with my face to the ground. His great claw gripped my shoulder, and I could feel his teeth trying to get a grip of my head through the thick kudu hide hunting cap I wore to protect my head and hair from the thorns that lie in wait for you everywhere in the bushveld. My gun lay some yards away, hopelessly out of reach, and I thought my end was near. Everything had happened so suddenly that I had not even screamed, or my husband might have heard and come to my help. Strange to say, the very desperateness of my plight drove away my first sensation of horror, and I resolved to sell my life dearly, if sell it I must. The instincts of the hunter, developed since my coming to the wilds, came to my help. Here was a deadly enemy to be grappled with, and, failing other weapons, I began to use my hands. Only one kind of counterattack, I realised, would prevent the beast from chewing me up. The leopard knew, of course, that 2 other enemies of his had passed on before me without seeing him, and to this fact, together with the toughness of my head covering, I owe it that he did not crush my skull on the instant. The proximity of the 2 men served as a distraction. Keeping a watchful eye on the track in front, he grovelled over me and turned me over with his terrible paw, as a cat will do with a mouse. For one instant his snarling ceased, as he seemed to glimpse a movement some distance away. He raised his head slightly, and I wildly grabbed both his ears in the hope of getting my shoulder out from under his terrible claws. With a jerk the beast flung his head loose and, snarling more horribly than ever, was about to seize my arm with his teeth, when a loud shout startled him. Halt! For the space of 2 seconds he lifted his head once more and relaxed his grip in order to investigate. The movement gave me just enough time to enable me to scramble to my feet, ready to grapple with the beast on more equal terms. I learned afterwards that as the leopard jerked his head clear of my grip on his ears, the keen-eyed African boy, searching the grass and rocks for a glimpse of the quarry, caught sight of him and shouted to my husband. Then, to their horror, they both saw me on foot grappling with the animal, and ran furiously towards us, shouting their loudest to distract his attention. A wild hope took possession of me that, faced with fresh assailants, the great cat would leave me and make off into the long grass. But a wounded animal with only a slim chance of life is not so easily intimidated. While my rescuers hurried to my help, the beast and I fought for mastery. I think I know now what St. Paul had in mind when he wrote of having fought with beasts at Ephesus. Believe me, it is not an adventure to be lightly sought after. I tried to grab the brute by the throat, in a frantic effort to strangle him, and for a few desperate seconds I seemed to be holding him at bay. But a leopard has other weapons than his teeth. He is a cat, and knows how to scratch with deadly effect. With one stroke he tore my clothes from shoulder to waist, while with his forepaw he nearly scalped me. Wildly I tried to protect my face, and succeeded in a measure, but it gave my antagonist his opportunity. Using teeth and claws together, he hurled me to the ground once more, just at the very moment when my husband and the boy came bounding up. I glimpsed my husband's blazing eyes and heard him shout, "Cover your eyes if you can while I try to shoot." Then the great paw pinned me to the ground again. It would have been a mercy had I lost consciousness then, but I didn't. I felt the beast bear down upon me with his full weight, crouching as if for a spring should either of my rescuers dare to interfere. So closely did he crouch to my body that my husband was afraid to use his rifle. I felt the breath being crushed out of me, and in my desperation I tried to roll the beast off my body. With his unwounded leg, the brute clawed at me as a cat will when held captive against his will, and I felt the flesh being ripped from my thigh to the knees. It was horrible. My husband saw it too, and threw down his gun in order to grapple with the beast, but the plucky native boy forestalled him with a shout of, "Keep the gun ready, Baas!" He flung himself like a lightning flash upon the leopard, grabbed him by the ears, and lifted his head and shoulders off my body. Then it was the boy's turn. With a roar of rage, the infuriated beast shook himself free and turned to maul him. The fraction of time it took him to turn gave my husband the target he was waiting for. A shot rang out, and the leopard fell dead. The rest is soon told. An improvised stretcher, the gentle ministrations after an hour or two of my nearest woman neighbour, who, by great good fortune, knew a good deal about nursing. Gallons of permanganate to wash my many wounds. Then a long, dreary ride behind donkeys. And, finally, at nightfall, a cosy bed in a little hospital with hours of blissful oblivion denied me during the terrifying moments I lay under the claws of the great cat. I still bear many marks of the fight, and shall do to the end of the chapter, but I am keener with my gun today than ever, observing but one prohibition laid upon me on my return from the hospital: never to get into the neighbourhood of a wounded animal again. If I have one regret, it is that I came to live in the wilds ignorant of the elementary principles of medicine and nursing. Had my neighbour been as ignorant as I, well, I have the doctor's assurance that I should not have lived to tell this tale, and, who knows, it may fall to my lot one day to help some other woman in a similar plight.